New state polls from Georgia and North Carolina prove my point about the 2024 presidential election. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another video with On Point Politics, your number one stop for all things polling that isn't beholden to any mainstream media source and will give you the honest and objective analysis it believes about any state, federal, gubernatorial, or any type of election in the United States. Make sure to hit the like button and to subscribe if you want more content just like this. Make sure to comment your thoughts down below after watching the video, and go ahead and follow me on X at onpointpolitics in all lowercase. We just hit 50,000 subscribers. I would like to thank all of you who made that possible. I will be stepping up the content in October. You will see improvements in a possible background setting, as well as the way I film the content, including my intro and whatnot. And we'll be, possibly getting a lot of collabs on the way coming up this October and possibly even next month. New state polling out of Georgia and North Carolina has Donald Trump up by 6 points in the state of Georgia and up 2 points in North Carolina. These are very good polls considering that in North Carolina, Quinnipiac tends to be pretty inaccurate there. However, in Georgia, they were 0.1 percentage points off in their final two polls. In the state of Georgia, getting about a Biden plus 0.3 lead in the state, which ended up being roughly a 0.2 margin of victory back in the 2020 presidential election, as you can see on your screen right here. And so that is a very good sign for Donald Trump going into the election. And if you've seen my other content, which I suggest you should watch my previous video today talking about the presidential election, as well as stuff about New York and New Jersey, we have actually seen that in those races, they're getting either redder or just closer from the 2020 race. New York and New Jersey are seemingly becoming single-digit races for Kamala Harris, and Florida is possibly entering double-digit margins for the former president. And the fact that we have a Quinnipiac poll that essentially aligns with our margin in the state, which is about a Trump plus 6.4 percentage point win, is albeit pretty impressive. And North Carolina tends to be a pretty hard state to poll because pollsters tend to miss a lot of people in certain parts of North Carolina that get brushed over by mainstream pollsters. And so the fact they have Trump up 2 is also a pretty good sign. And looking at the Cook Political Report swingometer, it's actually really difficult to get a scenario where Trump is winning Georgia by 6 and not winning the rest of the presidential election. And looking at this site Gallup, which is a respected pollster, and they essentially polled everybody on party ID, GOP issues, as well as economic pessimism. And what they found is that Donald Trump has all of the key indicators that are going to help him in the 2024 presidential election. The party identification and leaning favors the GOP as they lead by 3 percentage points, which is a little bit roughly where we have the popular vote at, by the way, unlike what most mainstream pundits and even some independent pundits have, which is about a Harris plus, 1 to 3 point lead in the national popular vote. However, here at On Point Politics, we believe that Trump is actually up in the popular vote by around 2 to 4 points even, which isn't what most of the mainstream media will tell you. Looking at the party being able to handle the most important problem, which does have a really strong track record in the Gallup polling. The Republican Party alone is up by 5 points, and the Republican Party as a whole is much less popular than Donald Trump. So the fact that they're leading on this question by 5 points is a very good sign, not only just for Donald Trump, but actually for senatorial and gubernatorial, as well as the House for the Republicans. It's all looking pretty good. And if Donald Trump outperforms expectations on election day, according to mainstream pundits, which him outperforming their expectations are basically matching my expectations practically. If he matches my expectations, he's going to massively outperform and help the House and Senate and gubernatorial races even be lean to even likely Republican, especially the Senate, where Democrats don't really have a lot of pickup room The only realistic pickup they have is Florida, but that's really out of the question for them. I believe Rick Scott's going to win his reelection fairly easily, especially with Trump being on the ballot. Presidential candidates tend to carry over those type of candidates, and so that's usually what tends to happen. And so the Republicans leading on this question's good. U.S. satisfaction at 22% favors the Republican. Economic confidence is minus 28, which is it hasn't been this bad since 2008. And in 2008 it was much worse, but hasn't even been even remotely a fraction of how bad it was from 2008 until now. Party being able to keep America prosperous, the 6-point lead for Republicans. Biden's approval rating 39%, which isn't great, and probably would have been his national popular vote share. If you looked at my content from a few months back, we had Trump getting 347 in the Electoral College, which a lot of people called me crazy for, but there was a reason why those internal polls that came out had him basically tied in all the states that I had Trump winning by 1 to 3 points, which was Minnesota, Virginia, New Mexico, New Hampshire, Maine. Those were going to go to Trump. Now, Kamala Harris did pick up a lot of some soft Kennedy support and some undecideds that were originally not going to vote for Biden. So she did build some of the base up. However, Donald Trump's share actually also went up too, especially after the assassination attempt. So really both candidates actually gained support after Kamala essentially replaced Biden and got coronated as the nominee. And looking at, other factors, I mean, the party favorabilities are practically tied. Republicans are up. Looking at party being able to handle and keep America safe from international threats, that's a 14-point lead. Very massive. Preference for government activity, the government to do less. And since the incumbent party is the Democrats, this question favors Republicans. And congressional job approval is about 20%, which that's usually where it tends to be. That's a little bit lower than usual. And this was all done from September 3rd to the 15th. So some of this was even done after the presidential debate from a few weeks ago. And we can see right now Republicans have taken the lead in party identification for the first time in a very long time, pretty much ever since they've done this polling. Republicans lead by 5 on the most important issues, which are the economy and immigration. Unlike last time where we had COVID-19, which kind of essentially tranquilized a lot of people's brains into thinking that President Biden was somehow going to save the country and that his economic plan was far better than Donald Trump. A lot of people got distracted, and Donald Trump was still able to use the economic card to at least not suffer a great election loss. But if he had had even a mediocre economy, he probably would have lost North Carolina and the state of Florida in 2020, which would have been pretty abysmal for him. And at that point, he probably wouldn't have decided to have run in 2024. But looking at this, the Democrats or Republicans, whether or not they're leading on the issues, basically every time that they are leading on the issue, that party tends to be the one that ends up winning the election. Looking at, for example, people who are essentially opinions on which political party is able to keep America prosperous, again, usually predicts the winner pretty well, except for 2000. There were a lot of anomalies there, and Florida was just such a ridiculously close election that it was pretty weird to look at that and see what was going on there. However, everywhere else, practically, even in 1984 and 1988, you saw that massively favor the Republicans. Even in 1980, the Democrats were ahead slightly. But again, this was done probably in September, and the presidential debates usually don't happen until a little bit later, and it's very apparent that Reagan did take the lead massively after the first debate, and so that could explain why the polling here was relatively close. Now, looking at economic confidence, it's at minus 28. That's just abysmal for the Democrats, and usually the party who has negative favorables on this tends to be the one that ends up losing. One of the exceptions was 2012, just because it was at -1. But we saw that usually the party who's in the positives tends to be the one that wins re-election. 2000, that wasn't the case. But most of the time it does. U.S. satisfaction, most of the time this sort of lines up as well. Party favorability ratings somewhat line up in a sense. It kind of depends on how you kind of look at this. preference for government activity. This is a little bit of a weaker correlation. So overall, all of the data from a respected pollster who practically started the polling industry, Gallup was the first pollster to poll in the 1948 presidential election. That's really when polling started, when it was Harry Truman versus Thomas Dewey, and they overestimated Thomas Dewey's support. And that's excusable because it was the first time that the polling industry was a major factor in the presidential race. So you could excuse a bad polling error back then since the industry was fairly new. However, to be off by 5, 6, 7, 8 points today with all the technology that we have is very, very, I would consider it malpractice. And it tends to be a lot of liberal leaning pollsters that tend to end up doing this for whatever reason. But when you look at those polls in Georgia and North Carolina, what's very fascinating is if we were to fill out Donald Trump's safe states, like, we fill out, his usual safe column states, and we're going to do the ones that are sort of a universal consensus. I'm not going to be using the margins from my actual prediction. Iowa and Ohio, Florida, Texas. I mean, they're all basically, no one thinks that, no serious person or political analyst thinks that they are going to go in the Democrat column and that they're basically banked in. Kamala Harris, California, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Illinois, DC, Maryland, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Delaware, Vermont, Connecticut, Maine's first, New York, New Jersey. They are going to be closer. New York and New Jersey. Rasmussen Reports. Mark Mitchell just did a video talking about some of the national numbers he got, and he compiled all the national numbers he's gotten from August 1st till now from New York, New Jersey, and Florida, and found margins that are pretty similar to ours here at On Point Politics, by the way. But looking at Hawaii, that's going to go. I do think Kamala Harris is going to underperform massively in Hawaii, more than most people are expecting. I think it could be under 15 points for Kamala Harris. But this is sort of an expanded battleground map based on all the polling that has been relatively competitive going into the 2024 presidential election, even spanning back to when Biden was the nominee. At this point, I could say that New Mexico, is probably going to go Democrat. I'd say possibly that might be the only state on here that I could have somewhat confidence that maybe leans Democrat. But other than that, that's actually about it. I mean, I can't really see any other state. I think that Minnesota, New Hampshire, Maine maybe lean in the Democrat column. Possibly. Maybe that second congressional district does. The polling hasn't looked too great for Trump, but they may be overestimating certain educated groups out of the second district of Nebraska. So that may explain the polling lead being greater than 2020 for Kamala Harris, or maybe it is really trending left off a cliff. We'll see. My election model is picking that up, though. The leftward trend in Nebraska second is pretty abysmal. Virginia is another state that maybe I could say maybe more than likely does go to Kamala Harris, but I only see it as a 2 to 3 point victory. And if she's only winning that by 2 to 3 points, she can't really win in any of the other states. And looking at those state polls and all the work we've done here at On Point Politics, Donald Trump is probably going to gain with non-college whites and probably will gain with African-American voters, and they're pretty prevalent in Georgia and North Carolina. And so I'd say I'm fairly confident those are going to go to the former president. And what's fascinating is that puts him at 251 electoral college votes. And we got another Emerson poll today that has Arizona at about a 3-point lead for Donald Trump. And that already brings him to 262. Nevada, with its non-college educated demographic, especially the Trump's play to no tax on tips, which is a big, big deal for Donald Trump's campaign and for the food service worker that works in that industry in Nevada, especially in Clark County, that really puts the state in a sort of lean column. And so the Sun Belt may be somewhat of a favorite to go to Trump, except for New Mexico. And that leaves Kamala Harris with a very straightforward path, and that's just 270 to the White House. And this is the problem that the Harris campaign is making. And I'd tell them, you're going to make a massive mistake by doing this. This is your really only narrow path because, Kamala Harris is doing slightly better with some overly educated, richer white voters, especially in the Rust Belt. But that's not going to really offset trends with your normie type of voter or your non-college educated voter or blue collar or white collar worker that really just doesn't like Kamala Harris. And so that's not going to be enough. They really are banking on that. I'd say that that's a very bad political strategy. And based on discussions that I've had with Tom Ellsworth from the Patrick Bet-David podcast, as well as Valuetainment, and talks with Gold Crown Politics and Red Eagle Politics, it seems like the Harris campaign is aiming for a very straight shoot in Michigan, North Carolina, and Georgia. Based out of the way the campaign is behaving, it seems like they're trying to pander to Black African Americans in this case, which Michigan, North Carolina, and Georgia do have a somewhat sizable electorate of them. And North Carolina and Georgia actually have a little bit more than Michigan. But when you look at this path, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense when you notice that these state polls from a somewhat liberal pollster show Donald Trump crushing Kamala Harris in these two states. Essentially, North Carolina's polling tends to be very skewed to the left. So any Trump lead in North Carolina is effectively possibly a single digit lead of about 4 to 7 points in the state of North Carolina. And so that alone already messes up their straight shot. And really, their two realistic paths could be Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. And the other path that my simulation model has actually found is her getting Arizona and Nevada alongside Michigan and Pennsylvania. But if Wisconsin does depart enough, it may still go Republican, which tells me that if Donald Trump were to narrowly win the election, his most likely path would probably be the 278 path, as Wisconsin has been the most conservative state in the Rust Belt trio for the last two cycles. And a lot of times people get misconstrued saying, oh, Pennsylvania is actually going to vote to the right, which this year may be possible given Trump's performance with African-American voters. But I still think Wisconsin may end up voting to the right of both of those other Rust Belt states. We'll see on Election Day. Michigan is not really a good sign for Kamala Harris either, because right now we have a Democrat mayor out of a majority Muslim community who just endorsed him. You have a lot of, EV mandates that have really affected workers in the state, which is a problem. And you also have a lot of jobs being shipped overseas, and that's going to really affect Kamala Harris's performance in Michigan. And again, guys, Pennsylvania, Joe Biden was Scranton Joe, and he had some sort of advantage there, but not really. Kamala Harris isn't going to carry that support over because he did very well with your normie Irish type of, male voter that was about middle-aged, and that actually really pushed him up in Pennsylvania. But those voters aren't going to identify with Kamala Harris the same way they did with Joe Biden. And so Donald Trump will probably make inroads with some groups. And even out of Indiana, there was a Notre Dame university poll that had Biden up by 37 points back in 2020, which now has Donald Trump up by 2. And that's a majority Catholic school. And so Catholics aren't really a great sign for Kamala Harris either. And so every demographic group, besides possibly college-educated voters, don't really look great for Kamala Harris. And not only that, it is looking not great for her in Georgia and North Carolina, which is a part of the campaign strategy to win. And if Pennsylvania falls, I have a hard time seeing Georgia and North Carolina going blue just because they have a sizable African-American population. And if Trump is up in Pennsylvania by 2 to 3, I'd have a hard time seeing Georgia and North Carolina also going Democrat. That is my current analysis on the latest Georgia and North Carolina polls that we just got. If you guys did enjoy this analysis, make sure to hit that like button and to subscribe if you want more content just like this. Turn on your bell notifications so you don't miss another video. Go to the description down below and comment your thoughts, and follow me on X. I post a lot on there, and I think you guys would enjoy that content as well. And I will see you guys in the next video.